if they wanted to run their businesses. They've been living in motels in Albury when their homes and their kids are 20 minutes away. So it's had a huge impact. This is really great news. It's been 5 weeks now, and of course that's been on top of all the other issues that have happened in our shire after the fires and the initial COVID pandemic lockdowns and restrictions. So there's been a massive impact on the economy of our shire now for the last 8 months. And this just added a whole other level of difficulty. We've had a really tough time. So the fire started around us on New Year's Eve. We were never directly impacted in the end, which of course was great. But economically, we had pretty much the same impacts as the shires around us that did have direct fire impact. So we had no visitors. We rely heavily on tourism in our towns of Beechworth, Rutherglen, Chiltern, Yakandanda and Kiwa Tangam. So all of that stopped just as we were starting to get back to normal with the Easter break, and that's another high season time for us. The COVID pandemic hit, so that got wiped out. So any chance of recovery from the fires kind of stopped dead. And then just as the first round of restrictions lifted, the border closures came in, and so we had just started to see great visitation coming up from Melbourne and from across the border as people can't travel overseas now. So things were starting to look really great, and literally within a week that all stopped again too. So it's just gone on and on. It's been unrelenting. We've been very fortunate. We have had no COVID cases in the same way as we had no direct bushfires, but we've been indirectly impacted, and because we were not directly affected, we missed out on a lot of the government support initially that was out there for fire-affected communities and COVID-impacted communities. So we keep falling through the cracks, yeah. So hopefully we can get back on our feet from here on in.
Australians could be blocked from sharing news content on Facebook and Instagram if an attempt to govern how media companies deal with big tech becomes law. Facebook has issued the threat in response to a proposed law that would see it and Google forced to pay Australian media organisations for hosting their content. The government insists its proposed laws are essential for creating a level playing field between local media and big internet companies. The Communications Minister Paul Fletcher has told Patricia Carvellis the government won't be deterred by the threat.
We're not going to be distracted from that. We're going to get on with our careful, thorough process. And what will now happen is that the ACCC is considering all of the submissions it's received. It will then bring forward its final advice to government after weighing up all that it's had put to it.
OK, as you say, big threats have been made before, but if there is follow-through, you still haven't addressed that key part of the question, which is, can the government stop Facebook and Instagram from actually blocking this news content being shared? Because you can't, can you? They can do whatever they want.
Well, we expect people doing business in Australia to comply with the law of the land in Australia. Now, Facebook has made a statement this morning. It's free to do that. Frankly, I'll leave it to them to explain what it is that they mean by that, but we're clear on what our public policy process is.
But if I could just politely interrupt, they could still comply with the law and just not let people share it. So they're complying because they're not using it. That's the way they can get around it. What do you say to that? Because you can't do anything.
Well, again, what I say to it is that I'm not going to be commenting or seeking to explain or analyse a statement that Facebook has made about the way it conducts its business. What I'm happy to speak about is the government's public policy intention here. Let's go back to the fact that the ACCC was charged with inquiring into these issues. That inquiry began as long ago as the end of 2017. It's a very thorough and comprehensive piece of work, and it found that Google and Facebook have substantial market power. Over 17 million Australians use Facebook every month. Over 19 million Australians use Google every month. And as the ACCC has found, these companies are unavoidable business partners for Australian news media businesses. And so what the government has asked the ACCC to do is to develop a mandatory code. Mandatory means backed by the force of law. It's gone through a careful and thorough process to do that. The most recent step in that has been a 4-week consultation process. It will now give its advice to government and government will then consider how we act in relation to that advice.
So do you feel like Facebook is bluffing here?
Well, the point I make is it is far from unprecedented for big tech companies to make heavy-handed threats. We will continue with our thorough and careful process, our public policy process, based upon the facts, based upon giving all stakeholders the chance to put their views.
So let me put this to you. Should Australians stop using Facebook if it refuses to let them share domestic news?
Well, look, again, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals. And
well, that is a live option because they put it on the table today.
Patricia, we've been clear from the outset. There's no question that Google provides useful services to Australians. There's no question that Facebook provides useful service to Australians. That's why 19 million Australians a month use Google, more than 17 million use Facebook. There's also no question that having a vigorous news media sector is an important part of our liberal democracy. It's important that there is trusted, reliable news from organisations which have journalists, which have editors, which have editorial policies. These are all the policy issues we're working through in a very careful and systematic way.
The Foreign Affairs Minister isn't drawing a link between Australia's deteriorating relationship with China and the detention of an Australian broadcaster. High-profile television anchor Chung Lei has been locked up for several weeks and is yet to be charged. Maurice Payne told 2GB she does not believe the detention of Ms Chung is an attempt to get back at Australia.
There's a number of levels at which this operates, but in this case it is a number of months, and we have seen this before. We've dealt with these situations before. It is important from our perspective that we do what we can to support her and to support her family, to encourage access to a lawyer for her and to continue to provide that consular support. That's certainly our focus. The ambassador and his team in Beijing are very much aware of that.
And is she being used as a pawn by China here to get back at Australia?
Deb, I would not describe it in that way. I think it is speculative at best to engage on that sort of premise. Our job is to ensure we're providing her with support and with consular assistance.
The head of Australia's Foreign Cyber Intelligence Agency says there are good reasons to spy on some Australians. The Australian Signals Directorate largely focuses on tracking foreign communications, but its role is slowly evolving. And its director, Rachel Noble, says it's able to track Australians overseas who are committing crimes like espionage and terrorism. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts has more.
Historically, it's very rare. For 30 years or so after it was formed in 1947, ASD's existence wasn't even known. It was a highly classified secret. Now, over the last few decades, that's changed, and slowly, ever so slowly, the organisation, along with other intelligence agencies, has been edging out of the shadows. And that process really sped up about a year or so ago when Mike Burgess, who used to be the head of ASD, now the head of ASIO, ushered in a bit of a new era when it came to the media. He's been giving a number of speeches. He even invited the ABC into the ASIO headquarters a few weeks ago in an unprecedented move. So things are moving and shifting a little bit in this front. Now, the reason for that? Well, these intelligence agencies have over time been given more and more powers, and so perhaps there's a feeling inside the agencies that the way to deal with that is to explain themselves a little bit more to the Australian people. As for Rachel Noble's speech today, there were no great surprises in it. Perhaps you'd expect the head of an intelligence agency to defend the need for secrecy. Nonetheless, she made that case, saying Australia's capabilities had to be kept secret from its adversaries. And she also said that there were some good reasons for ASD, which primarily focuses on intercepting foreign communications from overseas powers. There were nonetheless, she said, good reasons in limited circumstances for it to spy on Australians overseas if they were contemplating serious crimes. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
I'm sorry if this is news to you, but not all Australians are the good guys. Some Australians are agents of a foreign power. Some Australians are terrorists. Some Australians take up weapons and point them at us and our military. Some Australians are spies, and who are cultivated by foreign powers and are not on our side.
I think there is a desire inside these agencies to explain to Australians what they do. Perhaps what's also informing that is this increased public debate around espionage, around the powers that are granted to spy agencies, and in particular the way that those powers have been magnified in the online era. Now, ASD, the government has made it clear that it wants to expand its remit slightly. It wants to be able to draw on its expertise to allow police to actually prosecute Australians here in Australia in rare circumstances. On top of that, it's been made pretty clear that it's going to take a greater role protecting critical infrastructure here in Australia from foreign cyber attacks. So as the ASD's role evolves and it moves out of the shadows and away from operating purely overseas to take on a semi-domestic role, at least tangentially, perhaps the new Director General feels like she has an obligation to tell Australians exactly what it is and what it does.
Inmates of a high-security Queensland prison have begun rioting after staff struggled to deliver basic services, including meals and medication, amid a coronavirus lockdown. The prison went into lockdown last Thursday after Queensland Health revealed 2 of its correctional officers were part of a COVID-19 cluster. Queensland Corrective Services Commissioner Peter Martin says the situation for both staff and prisoners will remain challenging for some time.
Over the course of the last 24 hours, there's been some unrest, and some of that unrest unfolded in a number of events that occurred yesterday. And those events happened as a result of small amounts of fire that were lit, that were localised and easily extinguished. In some cases, prisoners flooded their cells with water that needed to be abated and addressed. There was the damage of some glass and also some CCTV. Now, the damage that was occurred in each of those occasions is localised, is moderate and can be easily repaired. But it's a difficult environment to do that sort of remediation work. And still today there were further incidents, a couple of incidents that occurred at 9 o'clock and one at 10:30 in which there were small fires lit by prisoners. Now these are localised, these were easily addressed. Our staff have done a great job to quell those particular behaviours locally, and the prison is in a state of calm at the moment. But the problem for us is that this has got a very long trajectory. We're in a 14-day isolation period. Currently we're at about day 4, and so this has got a fair way to go. And the prisoner population largely has been compliant, despite the fact that this has had significant implications for them. So this is a difficult situation, and it's one that will be going on for some considerable period of time until, and hopefully no further COVID-19 cases occur, but we get to the end of this process toward the latter part of next week, and we all can take a sigh of relief and move on to the next phase.